High above the clouds at 35,000 feet, Victor Grayson, the ruthless CEO of Titan Industries, leaned back in the plush leather seat of his private jet, a glass of whiskey in hand. His bloodshot eyes gleamed with a twisted sense of satisfaction as he surveyed the cabin, every inch of it an expression of his wealth and power. The polished wood, the sleek leather seats, and the low hum of the engines all served as a reminder of his empire. Around him, his top executives and underlings sipped champagne, flipping through reports, basking in the glow of their status. But there was one anomaly among them, Nia Jackson. She sat across from him, a sharp contrast to the rest. Her dark skin gleamed under the soft lighting of the cabin, her tailored gray suit hugging her frame perfectly. In her hands, she held a stack of files, her coffee cup resting quietly on the armrest beside her. There was an air of composure around her, one that annoyed Victor even more as he watched her, poised and unfazed by his presence. He felt a strange urge to break her calm. "Guess they're letting anyone on my jet now," Victor slurred, his voice dripping with derision as he turned to her, a smug grin spreading across his face. Without warning, he flung his drink in her direction, the amber liquid splashing across her face. The move was intentional, meant to humiliate, but Nia didn't flinch. She wiped the whiskey off her cheek slowly, her lips curling into a smirk that was more dangerous than any insult. Victor's laugh echoed through the cabin, loud and full of disdain. The executives around them shifted uncomfortably, casting furtive glances between the two. But Nia remained unshaken, her gaze locked on Victor with an intensity that made his spine prickle. "That's funny," Nia said, her voice smooth, cutting through his laughter like a blade. "I didn't realize insecurity came with a corner office. Must be tough knowing you're only here because Daddy handed you the keys." A ripple of suppressed laughter swept through the cabin. The junior executive, Tom Hensley, snickered under his breath, clearly enjoying the tension. Even Marjorie Clean, a senior VP with silver hair, struggled to suppress a chuckle. But Victor didn't find it funny. His jaw tightened and his knuckles whitened around the armrest. "How dare you?" he growled, standing up abruptly, towering over Nia's seat. His 6 feet 2 inches frame cast a long shadow across her. "You've got some nerve talking to me like that. I don't care what sob story got you on this plane. You're out of your league." He jabbed a finger toward her, his voice rising. "Somebody get her off my jet." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a king's decree to his subordinates. The flight attendants, 3 in Navy uniforms, huddled near the galley, their eyes darting nervously. Kelly, the youngest of them, hesitated, clearly torn between the CEO's demands and the situation unfolding in front of her. Greg, a wiry man, and Linda, the stern woman, exchanged a glance but remained silent. The tension in the cabin was thick, the passengers leaning forward, eagerly awaiting Nia's response. She didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her legs and brushed a speck of lint off her knee, as if Victor's outburst was nothing more than background noise. "You might want to sit down," Nia said, her voice level, almost bored. "You're embarrassing yourself, and I'd hate for you to trip over that ego when we land." A snicker erupted from Tom, followed by Marjorie clearing her throat to stifle her laughter. Even Greg, the flight attendant, looked away, his lips twitching as if he was about to break into a smile. But Victor wasn't amused. His eyes narrowed and his fury intensified. "Think this is funny, Hensley?" Victor snapped, his voice booming as he stormed down the aisle toward the young executive. Tom's face drained of color as Victor advanced on him, but before he could even speak, Victor waved him off dismissively. "You're fired, Hensley. Pack your bags when we land. I don't need clowns in my company." Tom's mouth hung open, his face flushing a deep shade of red. He stammered, his voice shaking as he tried to explain, but Victor cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I run this show, Hensley," Victor said, turning back to Nia with a menacing grin, his eyes cold. "And this is what happens when you cross me." He gestured at Tom's crumpled form, as if he were an example of what happens to those who defy him. "I erase problems like you," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. The cabin fell silent as Victor straightened his tie, taking a moment to smooth his hair with trembling hands. He looked at Nia with a renewed sense of superiority, as if he had just proven something to the entire room. His smirk returned, cold and victorious, as he reclaimed control of the atmosphere. Nia, however, remained unaffected. She leaned back in her seat, arms crossed, her eyes never leaving Victor's. "You're really digging yourself into a hole," she said quietly, her voice low but firm, each word weighted with contempt. "And I'm watching you bury yourself deeper." Victor's eyes narrowed. He couldn't stand the calmness in her voice, the way she refused to be intimidated. He was used to people cowering before him, but Nia was different. She wasn't afraid, and that drove him mad. "Sit down," he ordered, his tone icy. "You're making a scene." But Nia didn't respond to his command. Instead, she picked up her coffee cup, took a deliberate sip, and set it back down with the kind of grace that seemed to infuriate Victor even more. He turned to the crew, his voice booming as he barked at Kelly, the flight attendant. "You, get me the pilot, now." Kelly froze in place, her eyes wide. She glanced at Greg and Linda, silently asking for guidance, but neither of them moved. The tension was palpable, and every second felt like it dragged on longer than it should have. The executives in the cabin shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to react. Victor, however, was undeterred. He folded his arms, his gaze fixed on Nia, waiting for her to break. "You might want to take a seat, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You're about to be escorted off my jet." Nia didn't even flinch. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Victor's with a look that was calm, but full of quiet defiance. "Impressive," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "A full tantrum just to prove you're scared of a woman who's already outsmarted you." Victor's expression faltered for just a moment, a brief flash of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone who dared to stand up to him with such quiet power. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. But before he could speak, Tom, who was still reeling from being fired, piped up from behind them. His voice was shaky but firm. "She's right, you know," he said, his words slowly gathering strength. "You're acting like a bully, not a CEO." The room went still as the weight of Tom's words settled over the cabin. A murmur of agreement spread through the passengers, like a ripple across water, each person quietly acknowledging what had just been said. Victor's face turned a deep shade of red, and he stormed back toward Tom, his fists clenched at his sides as he loomed over him, his anger boiling over. "You want to play hero, Hensley?" Victor sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll bury you with her." Tom's eyes widened in fear as he shrank back into his seat, the defiance quickly draining from his body. He had spoken out, but now he realized the cost of crossing Victor Grayson. Victor turned his attention back to Nia, his gaze filled with disdain. "You think you've got them on your side?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "Watch this." With a swift motion, Victor spun around and stormed toward the cockpit. He bellowed at the crew, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Pilot, change course. Get us to the nearest dump of an airport. We're dropping this trash off where she belongs." The jet banked slightly as the pilot adjusted the course, the engines roaring as the flight path shifted. The passengers could feel the tension mounting in the air, the sense that something was about to go horribly wrong. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as the reality of what Victor had just ordered settled in. Nia, however, remained as composed as ever. She picked up her coffee once again, taking a slow sip, her eyes never leaving Victor's. "Keep digging," she said, her voice low and almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Victor's stomach twist. "You're going to love the hole you've made." Her words hung in the air, like a promise of something much bigger yet to come, and Victor, for the first time, felt a flicker of doubt. What exactly was she playing at? The jet continued its descent through the skies, the once smooth hum of the engines now vibrating with tension. The luxurious cabin, with its polished wood and plush leather seats, felt increasingly claustrophobic. Outside, the landscape blurred into a patchwork of barren desert and scattered towns as the plane banked toward an unknown airstrip. The passengers, once comfortably sipping champagne and flipping through reports, now sat in tense silence, each of them fully aware of the situation unfolding around them. Victor Grayson, who had been reveling in his small victory just moments earlier, leaned back in his seat, his fingers clutching the armrest tightly. He watched Nia out of the corner of his bloodshot eyes, trying to gauge if she had finally cracked. But she hadn't. She sat there, calm and composed as ever, as if nothing could rattle her. The flight attendants had remained at the back of the cabin, exchanging nervous glances, unsure of how to respond to Victor's command. Kelly, the youngest, still looked petrified, her face pale as she glanced toward the cockpit. Greg and Linda, though more seasoned, couldn't hide the uncertainty in their eyes. Victor's words had cut deep, but Nia had not shown an ounce of fear. Instead, she had fired back with such precision that it left him feeling like a fool. And now, as the jet continued its steady descent toward the backwater airstrip, Victor's fury grew. 30 minutes! The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. ETA to alternate landing. 30 minutes. Victor's lips curled into a smug grin. He had made his point. Nia would be off the jet, and his world would remain unchallenged. But Nia had a different plan. She reached for her coffee cup, taking another sip, her eyes never leaving Victor. The cabin had grown eerily quiet, all eyes on her as she remained unfazed. Her calmness was maddening. It gnawed at Victor, making him feel like a puppet. He had the power, the wealth, the influence. Yet she, a mere consultant, was the one who seemed to control the room. 30 minutes, Nia murmured, her voice cutting through the silence, a wry smile pulling at her lips. Plenty of time for you to think about your next move, Victor. But here's the thing, you won't win. Victor's grip on the armrest tightened. He opened his mouth to respond but paused, noticing the shift in the air. Something had changed. He could feel it, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Nia had a way of making everything he did feel pointless, as if his power was no match for the quiet force of her intellect. He stood up abruptly, slamming his glass onto the tray table, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. I'm not finished with you yet, he growled, his eyes locked on Nia. You've already lost, she replied coolly, her gaze unwavering. But go ahead, try me, prove me wrong. Victor, unable to contain his rage any longer, began to pace down the aisle. He reached the crew, his voice low and threatening. You know what to do, right? He asked, his eyes flicking toward Kelly, then Greg, then Linda. Each attendant nodded, though their expressions betrayed their hesitation. Good, Victor said, his grin widening. We'll be landing soon. Let's make sure she understands who's in charge. As he turned back to Nia, she finally rose from her seat, straightening her suit jacket, her movements deliberate and slow. There was something about her demeanor that only fueled Victor's frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the one who made the rules. Yet she stood there, the calm in the storm, with a smile that made his insides twist with fury. Let's get this over with, she said, her voice steady. But there was an undercurrent of something dangerous, something Victor couldn't quite place. She wasn't afraid, not at all, and for the first time he realized that he might have underestimated her. Victor's jaw tightened as Nia made her way down the aisle, her every step calculated, like she was moving through a battlefield, and he was the target. He had no intention of letting her walk off this jet in victory. As soon as they touched down, she was done. But there was a growing unease in the back of his mind that wouldn't go away, the nagging feeling that he might have underestimated her. Nia reached the front of the cabin, standing just outside the galley where the flight attendants had been huddling. She didn't look back at Victor, didn't flinch when he stormed over to her, his voice sharp, demanding, "What do you think you're doing?" His presence loomed over her, a challenge he hoped would make her break. But she didn't. Nia met his gaze with an unnerving calmness, her dark eyes unwavering. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago, she replied coolly, her voice cutting through the tension. Stop acting like you own the world, Victor. It's only a matter of time before the truth catches up with you. Victor's anger flared. He was about to lash out again when a voice crackled through the intercom, breaking the tense silence. Captain Reed to the cabin. We're nearing the alternate airstrip. Please prepare for landing in 20 minutes. Victor's eyes darted toward the cockpit, his mind racing. He didn't have much time left, but his plan was already set. Once they touched down, the crew would escort Nia off the jet. There would be no more games, no more mockery, just cold, hard power. He turned back to Nia, his smirk returning. You think you've got everyone fooled, don't you? But when we land, You're nothing but a trespasser. My plane, my rules. Nia's lips curled into a knowing smirk. You don't get it, do you? She asked, her voice almost pitying. I'm not playing your game. I never was. Victor's eyes darkened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had expected her to crumble, to beg for mercy like the others. But there was something about her that was different. She wasn't afraid, and it made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't explain. Enough of this, Victor barked, his voice full of venom. Flight attendants, escort Ms. Jackson to the back. Now. Kelly, Greg, and Linda hesitated. Their eyes met, but none of them moved. Nia's presence had made them question what they were really doing on this flight. Could they really carry out Victor's orders, knowing what they had just witnessed? Nia, seeing the hesitation, stepped forward. You don't have to do this, she said, addressing the crew as if they were the ones in control, not Victor. This isn't your fight. You're not the ones who need to be afraid. Greg shifted uncomfortably, but it was Kelly who finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I can, she started, but Victor's sharp voice interrupted her. Do your job, Kelly, he snapped, glaring at her. I'm not asking. For a moment, the cabin was thick with tension. Nia's calm gaze never wavered, but Victor could see the cracks beginning to form in the crew's loyalty. They weren't so sure anymore. Fine, Kelly said, her voice shaking, but I'm not touching her. Victor's eyes flared with rage, but before he could respond, the jet lurched, and the familiar hum of the engines shifted. The plane had begun its final approach to the landing strip. Prepare for landing, the pilot's voice echoed, sending another ripple of unease through the cabin. Nia turned to face Victor one last time before the landing, her voice soft but firm. You're not winning this, she said, her words sinking deep into the tense air between them. You may control this jet, but that doesn't mean you control me. Victor's fury reached its peak as the jet continued its descent. His plans had crumbled before his eyes, and he wasn't going to let her make him look weak. Watch me, he muttered under his breath. I'll make sure you regret this, Nia. As the plane descended toward the airstrip, the final showdown loomed ahead. And for the first time, Victor realized that he might not be the one calling the shots after all. The jet touched down with a soft thud, the tires screeching lightly against the worn runway as it came to a stop. The engines hummed down to a low growl, and a tense silence enveloped the cabin. Outside, the dusty, isolated airstrip stretched into the horizon, the surroundings barren and forgotten. It was a far cry from the glittering luxury of the jet's interior, a stark contrast that only highlighted the power Victor had to control every inch of his world. Victor's eyes remained locked on Nia as the plane came to a halt, his jaw clenched tight with simmering anger. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He was going to make her pay for the disrespect she'd shown him. He would show everyone that no one crossed Victor Grayson and got away with it. The flight attendants remained frozen, their eyes darting between Victor and Nia. The crew had been tense ever since Victor's outburst, and now as the plane came to a halt, there was a heavy stillness in the air, a quiet before the storm. Get her off my plane, Victor growled, his voice a low, controlled snarl as he stood up from his seat. Now! Kelly, still the youngest of the flight attendants, took a step forward hesitantly. She glanced at Greg and Linda, both of whom looked just as conflicted. They had witnessed everything that had transpired on the jet. Victor's bullying, Nia's calm composure, the way Nia had outsmarted him at every turn. Now they had to decide if they were willing to carry out his orders. Greg, the wiry attendant, swallowed hard, but his gaze flickered toward Nia. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could speak, Linda, the more seasoned flight attendant, stepped forward with a sharp exhale. Victor, we're not sure this is the best way to handle things, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Victor shot her a venomous glare. I don't need your opinion, Linda. Just do your job. His eyes narrowed, his patience thinning. I'm in charge here. Linda hesitated for a moment longer, but then nodded curtly. She turned to Nia, her face tight with discomfort. Ms. Jackson, I'm afraid we need you to come with us. Nia remained seated, her back straight, as she calmly gathered her files. She looked up at Linda, meeting her gaze with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. You don't have to do this, Nia said softly, her voice calm but laced with authority. This is not your fight. I'm not your problem. Linda's face softened for a brief moment. She looked at Nia, then at Victor, her inner conflict palpable. But before she could respond, Greg spoke up. I can't do it, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I can't kick her off. A ripple of agreement ran through the crew, but Victor's response was immediate. He stormed toward them, his anger palpable, his face twisted in fury. Enough, he barked, and the force of his words seemed to fill the cabin. You're all worthless if you can't follow orders. Get her off my plane, now! The crew flinched, and in the tense silence that followed, Nia stood up. Her movements were deliberate, calm, entirely unbothered by the chaos that surrounded her. She adjusted her gray suit and made her way toward the aisle. Victor, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, you've already lost. You can't force me out of here, and you certainly can't break me. So let's get one thing straight. I'm not going anywhere. You'll have to find another way to get rid of me. Victor's jaw clenched, and for a split second, he seemed taken aback. The confidence in Nia's voice, the quiet power she held, was like a slap in the face. He had expected her to beg, to cower, but she wasn't playing his game. Instead, she was playing her own. You don't know who you're dealing with, he hissed through gritted teeth. But Nia didn't respond. She simply walked past him, her stride purposeful and unbroken. The crew watched her go, and for the first time they realized they weren't just witnesses to this standoff. They were part of it. And as Nia reached the rear of the cabin, where the flight attendants waited, she turned to face them. You don't have to do anything, Nia said, her voice firm but calm. Just do what's right. The crew, now fully aware of what was at stake, exchanged uneasy glances. Would they follow Victor's orders? Or would they stand with Nia, the woman who had proven to be more than just a consultant? The jet's engines whined as the pilot began the final approach to the airstrip. The cabin fell silent, the tension palpable. Everyone knew that something was about to happen, something that would change the course of this flight forever. But what? Nia stood in the back of the cabin, her back to Victor, waiting for whatever came next. She was ready. The jet's wheels touched the ground with a jarring bump, and the cabin rocked slightly as it slowed to a stop. The runway was as desolate as it appeared from the air, nothing but dusty roads and scrubby desert stretching in all directions. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath, and then the atmosphere inside the plane shifted again. Victor stood, towering over the others, his eyes locked on Nia. He had spent the entire flight making his point, humiliating her, firing people on a whim, and displaying his power like it was his to control. But now, at this moment, he wasn't sure if he was the one who was in charge anymore. He hated the way her calm demeanor had unraveled his authority, and the fact that he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was one step ahead was starting to eat at him. The flight attendants, still in their positions, looked to him for guidance, but it was clear that they were waiting for him to make the next move. They stood frozen, unsure of what exactly would happen now that they were on the ground. Victor's eyes narrowed. He had made it clear what he wanted. He needed Nia off the plane. Now, but as he stood there, his hands clenching and unclenching, something inside him told him to be careful. This wasn't just about power anymore. There was something else at play, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Take her out, Victor ordered, his voice low but filled with authority. Now! Nia stood still, her expression unreadable, not a hint of fear crossing her face. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even flinching at the scene he was making. Instead, she gave him a cool, deliberate smile, one that both infuriated and intrigued him at the same time. You think I'll just let you dictate how this ends? She asked, her voice cutting through the tension. I've got more control in this room than you realize. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a split second, Victor wondered if she was right. The power he had always wielded so effortlessly now seemed fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing with possibilities, all of them worse than the last. Don't push me, he growled, his patience wearing thin. Nia's smile never wavered as she turned toward the crew, who were still waiting for Victor's next command. You don't have to follow him, she said softly. None of you do. Her words were a subtle but powerful push, and for the first time, The crew members began to shift uncomfortably. Kelly, who had been the first to hesitate earlier, glanced at Greg and Linda, her hands trembling. They were all standing at a crossroads, unsure of which side to choose. Victor's eyes darted to the crew, frustration clear on his face. "Are you all going to let her talk down to you like that?" he snapped, stepping forward to assert control once again. But as he did, Nia stood up and faced him directly, her posture straight and unyielding. "Victor," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "you may control this plane, but you don't control me. And you certainly don't control them." Victor's pulse quickened. He had expected this to be over. He had expected Nia to break under the pressure, but she hadn't. She had turned the tables on him at every turn. The smugness he had walked into this cabin with was slowly being replaced by doubt, and it gnawed at him more than he was willing to admit. "You can't outsmart me," Victor spat, his voice shaking with anger. But Nia didn't respond to the insult. She simply turned and walked down the aisle, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The crew parted slightly to let her pass, and for a brief moment, Victor saw the faintest flicker of hesitation in their eyes. It was a look he had seen in the eyes of employees before, when they weren't sure whether to follow orders or stand up for what was right. As Nia reached the back of the cabin, she paused, turning to face the crew one last time. "I've fought for everything I've achieved," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "And I'm not about to let someone like you tell me where I belong. Do what's right, not what's easy." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Victor felt his grip on the situation slipping. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about something bigger, something he hadn't seen coming. The air outside was thick with dust and silence as the passengers slowly began to gather their things, their gazes shifting nervously between Nia and Victor. The tension was palpable, and for the first time, Victor Grayson realized he might have underestimated the one person he never thought would be his downfall. As the door of the jet hissed open, the crew hesitated. Would they let him win, or would they stand with Nia? The next few moments would decide everything. Victor's eyes burned with fury as Nia walked down the aisle, her every step deliberate, as though she were taking control of the situation. He had expected her to break, to beg, but instead, she had outsmarted him at every turn. And now, as the jet doors opened, the tension in the cabin thickened, and his power, which had always been absolute, felt strangely fragile. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do. They had all seen the way Nia had handled herself with such composure, even after being humiliated. Now it was clear that the balance of power was shifting, and they were caught in the middle. Victor's mouth was dry, his pulse quickening as he fought to retain control over a situation he no longer understood. He turned to Kelly, Greg, and Linda, his voice icy. "Get her off my jet. Now don't make me say it again." The words were like a command, but they landed with less authority than he intended. There was a flicker of doubt in Kelly's eyes as she glanced nervously at Greg and Linda. She had been the first to hesitate, and it seemed like the others were following her lead. I can't," Kelly stammered, her hands trembling. Victor's jaw clenched in frustration. "What do you mean you can't?" he spat, his voice rising. "You work for me. This is my plane, my world. Do your job." But Kelly remained where she stood, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The room seemed to tilt as the tension grew thick in the air. It was becoming clear to everyone. Victor was losing control. Nia, still calm as ever, turned toward the flight attendants, her eyes soft but unwavering. "You don't have to listen to him," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that cut through the tension. "You don't have to be part of this. You have the power to choose." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time the crew hesitated, not because they feared Victor, but because they realized they had an option. Greg and Linda exchanged a look, unsure of what to do. It wasn't just about doing their jobs anymore. It was about morality, about standing up for what was right. Victor was too angry to notice the shift in the crew's resolve. His anger surged again, a fire that he tried to control but couldn't. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice tight with rage. "You think you can talk me down? You think you've won, Jackson?" Nia didn't respond at first. Instead, she turned back to face him, her gaze steady. "No," she said softly. I don't need to win. I just need you to see that you've already lost. Victor's chest tightened, his mind racing to come up with a plan, any plan, that would restore his dominance. But with each passing second, the confidence that once defined him felt more like a facade, crumbling under the weight of Nia's calm resolve. The tension in the air felt suffocating, but it was clear. Nia had not only gained control of the situation, she had outplayed him. And for the first time in his life, Victor Grayson wasn't sure if he had anything left to lose. The doors to the jet swung open, revealing the barren, dusty airstrip stretching into the distance. The scene outside was desolate and harsh, a far cry from the gleaming city lights and luxury Victor was used to. For him, this wasn't just an empty runway, it was a symbol of his growing desperation. Nia stood at the threshold, her gray suit untouched by the chaos in the cabin. She paused before stepping into the harsh desert light, a quiet confidence surrounding her. She knew what was coming next. She knew that even if Victor tried to force her off this plane, she wasn't leaving without a fight. But as she took one last look at Victor, her eyes narrowed slightly, and her lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't over yet. Victor's fury simmered as Nia stepped past him, heading toward the open door with a calm that only fueled his growing unease. The sight of her walking toward the airstrip, unfazed by the mess he had created, made his stomach twist. He had controlled everything for so long, but now, as the plane's door remained wide open behind her, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost the upper hand. He stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his own powerlessness pressing down on him. Nia wasn't running. She wasn't afraid. She was walking away, and that somehow felt worse than any direct confrontation. He had expected a dramatic exit, a meltdown, a spectacle, something that would allow him to walk away with the last word. But instead, she had stolen that moment from him. "Get her!" Victor barked again, his voice trembling with the edge of panic. The crew exchanged looks, but no one moved. Nia paused at the threshold, glancing back over her shoulder. "You've had your moment," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the cabin. "But this isn't over yet, Victor. You may have made the rules, but you can't control everything." For a brief second, the crew stood as if paralyzed, caught between following Victor's commands and the realization that they had a choice. The tension in the cabin was palpable as each attendant seemed to weigh the consequences of their actions. Kelly looked to Greg, Greg to Linda, and Linda to Victor, but no one made a move. Victor, now standing alone in the middle of the cabin, felt the sting of defeat burn deep. "You want to play the martyr, Jackson?" he snarled. "Fine, but you'll regret it." His voice was filled with venom, but it rang hollow in the thick air. He was trying to regain some semblance of control, but his words felt empty, even to him. He had tried to break her, humiliate her, and instead, he had made himself the villain in his own show. Nia turned back to face him one last time, her eyes narrowing slightly, a smirk still playing at the edges of her lips. "If I were you, I'd think twice before making threats you can't follow through on," she said quietly. "You've already lost." The finality in her words was undeniable. She wasn't backing down, and in that moment, Victor knew it wasn't just about this plane or this moment anymore. It was about something much bigger, something he had underestimated from the very start. With a stiff, jerky motion, Victor sat back down in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests like he was trying to steady himself. The remaining passengers, who had been silent witnesses up until this point, started murmuring among themselves, exchanging looks of disbelief. The air was thick with the weight of what had just transpired. For the first time in a long while, Victor felt small. He had tried to dominate everything, but Nia had turned the tables, and now she was in control. His empire, his company, his power. None of it mattered in the face of what she had just done. The cabin grew quiet again as Nia stepped out onto the tarmac, her silhouette framed by the dusty airstrip, the sun casting a long shadow behind her. The door of the jet slowly closed, sealing Victor and the crew inside, while Nia stood alone on the ground, ready for whatever came next. As the plane taxied down the runway, Victor was left with one bitter truth. He had lost to someone he had dismissed as a mere consultant, and now all that remained was the fallout. Whatever it would be, he knew it would be the beginning of a new battle, one that he wasn't sure he could win. Outside, the world seemed so much bigger than the cramped space inside the jet. Nia's confidence radiated under the harsh desert sun, and in that moment, she realized the stakes had never been higher. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about making sure Victor Grayson paid for every wrong he had ever done. The sun hung low over the sprawling desert, casting long, sharp shadows across the abandoned airstrip. Nia stood at the edge of the tarmac, her gray suit now slightly dusted, a silent figure against the vast emptiness surrounding her. The jet had left, its engines roaring as it made its way into the sky, and with it, the last of Victor Grayson's influence. But as the wind kicked up dust around her, Nia knew this was just the beginning. The moment she had walked off the jet, she had felt the weight of her decision settle over her. No longer was she simply a consultant trying to make her way through the corporate world. This was bigger than that. Victor's attempts to humiliate her had only solidified her resolve. She wasn't going to let him get away with it. In the distance, the faint sound of approaching vehicles broke the stillness. A pair of black SUVs appeared, kicking up the dry dirt as they rolled onto the airstrip. Nia didn't flinch. She knew what was coming, and she was ready. She had prepared for this moment, understanding that leaving the jet was just the first step in her journey to dismantle Victor's empire. The SUVs screeched to a halt in front of her, their tires grinding against the gravel. The doors flew open, and a group of men in tactical gear stepped out. They were a far cry from the sleek, polished professionals who usually accompanied Victor. These were the people he called when things got dirty. His enforcers, the ones who dealt with problems that couldn't be solved with money or influence. One man, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun strapped to his side. His eyes scanned Nia up and down before locking with hers. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice rough, devoid of any warmth. Nia didn't respond at first, her eyes never leaving his. She could feel the tension building around her, but she didn't let it show. The silence stretched between them for a long, pregnant moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The man stepped closer, but Nia remained unmoved. His gaze flickered to his colleagues for a moment, silently asking if they should make a move. Nia could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had been expecting someone weaker, someone who would back down at the first sign of aggression, but not her, not Nia. One of the other men, a younger one with a buzz cut, muttered something under his breath. "She's not scared of us. This isn't how it's supposed to go." The leader shot him a sharp glance before turning his attention back to Nia. "Victor wants you gone. You've made a mistake, walking away from his plane." Nia tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Victor doesn't control me anymore," she said, each word punctuated with resolve. "He never did." The leader took another step toward her, his hand now resting fully on the grip of his gun. "This is your last chance to leave peacefully. Step aside, and we won't have to do this the hard way." Nia's eyes flashed with determination. "There is no peaceful for me anymore. You want to fight? Fine, but it won't be with me." She took a step forward, her posture unwavering, her eyes locked on his with a quiet intensity. The tension in the air thickened. The leader seemed to hesitate for a split second, unsure of how to proceed. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. Behind them, the sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Nia's heart quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. This was the moment of truth. One way or another, she would take control of this situation. The leader's hand tightened around the gun, but Nia didn't flinch. Instead, she stood her ground, her calm demeanor only serving to aggravate him further. The sirens were growing louder, and the tension in the air felt almost electric, like a storm about to break. "You're making a huge mistake," the leader spat, his voice filled with irritation. "You don't want to go down this path, lady." Nia's gaze never wavered. "It's too late to talk about mistake," she said, her tone firm and unwavering. "Victor Grayson has already made his, and I'm here to make sure he pays for them." At that moment, a fleet of black sedans appeared in the distance, kicking up the dirt in a cloud. The sound of tires screeching against the gravel echoed off the empty airstrip. Nia could feel the weight of the situation shift again. This wasn't just about Victor's goons anymore. This was about something much bigger, The leader's eyes flickered toward the approaching vehicles, a flash of concern crossing his face. He had been expecting the authorities, but not like this. The sirens were almost deafening now, and as the vehicles skidded to a halt behind him, several police officers jumped out, their guns drawn, eyes scanning the surroundings for any immediate threat. The leader cursed under his breath. "You're playing with fire," he muttered, his face a mix of frustration and disbelief. But there was no turning back now. Nia smiled coldly, her confidence rising. "Number you are." The officers moved quickly, their movements coordinated and precise. They had arrived just in time to witness the standoff. The tension between Victor's men and the law was thick, but the balance of power had shifted. Nia was no longer just a woman standing alone in a desert. She was the catalyst for the change that had begun, the very force that had the power to dismantle Victor's empire. "Arrest these men," one of the officers ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "They're working for Victor Grayson. We have a warrant for his arrest, but we're taking his men in first." The leader's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he seemed to realize how outmatched he and his team were. The officers moved swiftly, apprehending the men one by one, pulling them away from Nia as she stood with an air of quiet authority. "Victor's not going to get away with this," Nia said, her voice calm but with a sharp edge to it. "This is only the beginning." As the last of the goons was taken into custody, Nia turned to the officer who had given the order. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't expect you to be here so soon." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "We got your message. The city's been buzzing ever since we heard about the sabotage and the false distress calls. We've been monitoring Victor for a while, but this is bigger than we thought." Nia felt a surge of relief, but she knew that this was just the beginning. Victor Grayson might be behind bars for now, but she could feel the gears of a much larger machine at work, and it was only a matter of time before his influence stretched its claws out again. She wouldn't let that happen. The sun had almost set, casting a fiery glow across the desert. Nia stood tall, watching the last of the police vehicles drive off with Victor's men in tow. This wasn't a victory. It was the first step in something much bigger. She knew there was a long road ahead, but with every step, she felt the weight of justice tipping in her favor. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the streets of Los Angeles. Nia stood on the rooftop of an abandoned building, her eyes scanning the city below. The calm night air swept through her, cooling the sweat that clung to her skin. The chaos of the past few days seemed a lifetime ago, but it had only been hours since she had stepped off the jet. Victor Grayson's men were behind bars, and the police had cleared the airstrip. But that didn't mean the battle was over. Nia knew that, even though she had won this small skirmish, Victor wasn't done. He never would be. He was a predator, and she had just become his prey. But she wasn't going down without a fight. Not this time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her eyes narrowing as she saw the name on the screen, Tom Hensley. She swiped to answer, the sound of his breathing heavy on the other end. "Nia," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk. There's something you need to know about Victor." Nia's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this call. She knew that Victor wasn't just going to sit back and let things unfold without retaliation. "I'm listening," she replied, her tone steady. "There's a major corporate move coming," Tom continued. "Victor has some serious backers behind him, and they're making their move. He's got connections everywhere. The board of Titan, they're circling, and they've already started putting plans in place to shut you out completely." Nia's mind raced. She had known that Victor's influence went beyond his personal vendettas, but hearing it from Tom made it real. She had expected him to play dirty, but this was something else. This was an attack on her very existence in the corporate world. He wanted to erase her, to make sure she would never have the power to threaten him again. "What do you mean, shut me out?" she asked, her voice low but filled with a cold determination. "What's their play?" "They've already started calling in favors," Tom replied. "The lawyers are on it. They filed paperwork to revoke your access to Titan, and they're planning to announce a new CEO within the next 48 hours. The board's already on board. It's all coming down faster than I thought." Nia took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had fought too hard to get where she was to let someone like Victor Grayson tear it all away. But this time, it wouldn't be a quick win. It would take everything she had to turn the tables on him again. "Let them come," she said, her voice firm, filled with a quiet rage. "Victor wants to play dirty? Then I'll make sure they understand how much dirt he's hiding. I'll bury him if I have to." Tom paused for a moment, and Nia could hear the worry in his voice. "Nia, be careful. This is bigger than what you think. They'll use everything to bring you down." "I know what I'm up against," Nia replied, a flicker of a smile tugging at her lips. "But he's underestimated me before. He won't make that mistake again." Her mind was already working, calculating the next steps, figuring out how to leverage the situation to her advantage. She wasn't going to let Victor's influence bleed into her future. The stakes had just been raised, but Nia Jackson was ready. She wasn't just going to survive this fight. She was going to win it, no matter what it took. "I'll see you soon," Nia said, cutting the call before Tom could say anything more. She had plans to make. The city stretched out before her, the lights twinkling like 1,000 promises. But tonight, none of them were for her. She would have to take them. The battle for Titan wasn't over. It was just beginning. And she would fight like hell to take back what was rightfully hers. Nia descended from the rooftop, her footsteps steady and purposeful. The city below buzzed with life. But in her mind, it was already consumed by the war she had no choice but to fight. As she walked through the dimly lit alleyways, the weight of the phone call with Tom lingered, but it was the certainty in her own resolve that propelled her forward. She needed a plan. There was no time to waste, and the clock was ticking. Victor had the resources, the power, and the allies to strike where it would hurt the most. But Nia had something he didn't. She had the truth. She had the strength to expose him, and that was more than just a weapon. It was a promise. She would stop him before he could erase her. The first step was going after the board. They had made their move already, siding with Victor. But that was exactly what Nia had expected. Corporate politics were as predictable as they were corrupt. It wasn't just the people she needed to watch out for. It was the system, the very structure that allowed people like Victor to thrive. The game had always been rigged, but she was going to rewrite the rules. She pulled out her phone again, dialing a number she hadn't called in years. The line rang once, twice, before a familiar voice picked up. "Nia," came the voice of her old ally, a lawyer named Darnell, with whom she'd worked in the past when navigating corporate battles. "I didn't expect to hear from you. What's going on?" Nia's lips curled into a small, determined smile. "I need your help. It's time to take down Victor Grayson, and I need to hit him where it'll hurt the most, his precious Titan Industries." Darnell was silent for a moment, likely processing the gravity of her request. "You're going to war with him, huh? You know what that means, right? He's got more power than you think. You've seen how he operates. He won't go down easy." "I don't plan on making it easy for him," Nia replied, her voice steady, her mind already ticking through the details. "I need everything you can get me on Titan's finances, his connections, his weaknesses. I'll need ammunition to expose the corruption. We're going to make sure the board sees him for what he truly is." Darnell sighed, a sound that told Nia he wasn't surprised by the request. "All right, I'll dig through everything, see what we can use. But Nia," he paused as though considering something important. "This isn't just about business anymore. It's personal. You've crossed a line with Victor. He's not just going to let you expose him. He'll try to destroy you." "I'm counting on that," Nia said, her eyes steely with resolve. "And when he does, I'll be ready." With that, the conversation ended. Nia slid the phone back into her pocket, the wheels in her mind turning relentlessly. She couldn't let up. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Every move she made from here on out had to be calculated, precise. Her next step was to gather support. The road ahead was treacherous, and she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by watching Victor fall. She thought back to Tom, her one true confidant in this. His footage had already been a crucial piece in her fight, and she knew he would be by her side, ready to push forward when the time came. As the night deepened, Nia's thoughts became clearer. She had a target, and she had the means to hit it. All she needed now was to execute. She had her sights set on Titan's boardroom, but she knew she'd have to get past a lot more than just corporate politics. Victor's reach went far, but with every move he made, she was one step closer to taking him down. Nia wasn't just fighting for her position. She was fighting for justice. And this time, she would make sure the scales tipped in her favor. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city as Nia stepped into the crowded streets of downtown Los Angeles. The towering buildings around her seemed to pulse with life. But inside, her mind was focused on one thing: Victor Grayson. His empire may have seemed untouchable, but she was determined to change that. The city felt alive in ways she hadn't noticed before, its energy driving her forward as she weaved through pedestrians. She wasn't just walking toward a destination, she was moving toward a confrontation, a moment that would define her future. Nia had been in battles before, but this one was different. This wasn't about surviving, it was about winning. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down at the screen. Tom Hensley. She swiped to answer, her mind already racing ahead to the next move. "Nia, it's worse than we thought." Tom's voice came through the line, his tone tight. "Victor's lawyer, Evelyn Morrow, just filed a motion for an emergency injunction. They're moving fast. They've already got the media spinning their narrative." Nia's pace slowed slightly, but she didn't stop. She had expected the legal onslaught, but hearing it from Tom made it real. "What kind of narrative are we talking about?" she asked, her voice steady. "They're painting you as the aggressor. They've twisted the facts to make it look like you've been sabotaging Titan from the inside. They're positioning you as a corporate threat, using every weapon they have, legal and public. If this goes to trial, they'll turn the media against you." Nia's grip on her phone tightened. She had known Victor wouldn't go down quietly, but this move, this attempt to control the media, to turn public opinion against her, felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. She had expected a fight in the boardroom, but now it was spilling into the streets. "They're not going to win," Nia said, her voice unwavering. "I won't let them. I need you to get everything on Morrow, every detail of her connections, her past cases, whatever we can use. If they want to play dirty, we'll play dirtier." Tom hesitated. "Nia, we're running out of time. They're pushing hard for a court date. You need to think about your next move." "I'm thinking about it," Nia replied, her eyes scanning the bustling street ahead. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everything Victor has built on lies, on manipulation. It's time to expose him for what he truly is." Tom fell silent for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. "I'll dig in tomorrow. We'll find something. But you need to be careful. This fight is about more than Titan. It's about your future." Nia's eyes narrowed as she passed by a street vendor, the sounds of the city washing over her. She had fought her whole life to get here, to this moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Victor, take that from her. She couldn't afford to lose now. "Don't worry about me," she said firmly, her voice a cold promise. "I've been fighting this fight long before I ever stepped into that boardroom, and I'm not about to stop now." She ended the call, the sound of the city's pulse in her ears matching the steady beat of her heart. She was walking into a battle, but this time, she would make sure that when the dust settled, Victor Grayson wouldn't have a chance to rise again. Nia continued down the sidewalk, her steps deliberate and firm as she passed through the chaos of the city. The skyscrapers loomed above her, casting long shadows over the streets. But the shadows weren't the only thing weighing on her. The threat of losing everything she had worked for, the fight against Victor Grayson, and the legal wrangling that was already underway, all felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. But Nia refused to show any signs of weakness. She had faced worse, and she was still standing. As she neared the entrance to Titan's headquarters, a wave of determination surged through her. This was it. This was where the final confrontation would unfold. She hadn't come this far to back down now, not with the battle so close at hand. The doors to the sleek building slid open with a soft whoosh, and Nia stepped inside, the cool, polished interior greeting her with its sharp, sterile atmosphere. The lobby was quiet, only a few staff members bustling around, heads down as they worked. But to Nia, it felt like a battlefield. Every corner of this place represented a piece of Victor's empire, a system that thrived on lies, deceit, and manipulation, and she was here to tear it down. Her eyes scanned the room, her thoughts focused, planning every step. She needed to talk to the board, to confront them about their complicity in Victor's corruption. The thought of it made her blood boil, but she knew that she had to be strategic. She couldn't let her anger get the best of her, not when so much was on the line. As Nia approached the elevator, she saw a familiar face, Marjorie Clean, one of the senior executives who had always been an ally of Victor's. The older woman's face softened when she spotted Nia, and she quickly approached, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "Nia," Marjorie said, her tone measured but still warm. "I've been hearing things. I don't know what you're planning, but I want you to know that I'm with you. I know what Victor has done, and I won't stand by him anymore." Nia raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden shift in Marjorie's loyalty. But she didn't let her guard down. There was a lot at stake, and she couldn't afford to trust anyone too easily. "I appreciate that," Nia said coolly, her eyes never leaving Marjorie's face. "But I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm here to take down a system that's built on lies. You want to help? Then stay out of my way." Marjorie flinched, but there was no mistaking the fire in Nia's voice. She nodded slowly, stepping aside as Nia stepped into the elevator. The doors closed behind her, and Nia exhaled sharply, her mind racing as the elevator ascended. She wasn't sure how much time she had, but she knew it was running out. The stakes were higher than ever before, and if she wasn't careful, everything she had worked for would come crashing down. As the elevator doors opened to the top floor, Nia stepped out into the boardroom. She could already hear the low hum of voices coming from inside. Victor's allies, the ones who had been complicit in his actions, were all in there, ready to defend him, to protect their own interests. But they wouldn't stand a chance against her. She pushed the door open, and the conversation stopped instantly. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her as she walked inside, her presence commanding attention. Nia could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, but she didn't waver. This was her moment. Victor Grayson's loyalists were sitting around the large, polished table, each of them looking at her with varying degrees of disdain and uncertainty. At the head of the table sat Harold Vance, the oldest and most loyal of Victor's supporters, his eyes narrowing as he took in Nia's confident posture. "Nia," Harold said, his voice dripping with disdain, "what brings you here today? I trust you're not foolish enough to think you have any claim to this company." Nia's lips curled into a small smile as she took her place at the head of the table, standing tall and unyielding. "I'm here to take back what's mine," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "And I'm not leaving until I've exposed all of you for the frauds you are." The silence in the room was deafening, but Nia didn't care. She had come this far, and there was no going back. Now she was ready to fight for everything she had earned, no matter what it took. Nia stood at the head of the boardroom table, her gaze unwavering as she looked around at the executives who had once been Victor Grayson's most loyal allies. The silence was thick, oppressive, as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Everything she had done, every calculated move, led her here. The battle was no longer in the courtroom or the media. It was in this room, with the very people who held the keys to Titan Industries. Harold Vance, the oldest member of the board and Victor's most trusted accomplice, was the first to break the silence. His eyes, narrow and cold, studied her as though she were an intruder in his domain. "You've got some nerve showing up here, Nia," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've lost. The game is over." Nia's lips curled into a small, confident smile. She had expected this kind of response. The board was a tight-knit group of people who had only ever answered to Victor. But she wasn't here to play by their rules. She was here to change them. "I'm not here to play, Harold," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I'm here to take back what's mine and expose you for the criminals you all are." There was a murmur around the table, some of the executives glancing at each other uneasily, others looking downright hostile. But Nia had no intention of backing down. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and now she was standing on the precipice of victory. Nothing was going to stop her now. Victor's loyalists were staring at her like she was the enemy, but it wasn't their stares that made her feel powerful. It was the knowledge that they were just pawns in a game much larger than they realized. They had been complicit in Victor's rise to power, turning a blind eye to his corruption, his manipulations, and his ruthless pursuit of control. But now Nia had the upper hand, and she wasn't afraid to use it. This company, this empire, was built on lies, on deception, she continued, her eyes locking with each of them in turn. And I'm here to make sure that truth comes to light. You can't hide behind Victor anymore. The truth is coming for all of you. Harold's face flushed with anger, and for a moment, Nia could see the faintest crack in his cold, calculating exterior. He had expected her to back down, to be intimidated, but she wasn't. Not now, not ever. You think you can just walk in here and take everything? Harold's voice was like a growl now, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. You're nothing without Victor's backing. You've got nothing. I've got the truth, Nia shot back, her voice low but full of conviction. And that's all I need to take this company back. You all knew what was going on, and you chose to look the other way. But it ends now. The room was silent once again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The board members looked between themselves, some shifting uncomfortably, others sitting rigid, unsure of what to do next. But Nia knew they were beginning to see the cracks forming in their carefully constructed world. They could deny the truth all they wanted, but it would catch up to them. The door to the boardroom opened suddenly, and in walked one of the company's top legal advisors, Lisa Morrison. She was a tall, composed woman, her face expressionless as she took a seat at the table, giving Nia a knowing glance. Nia didn't need to ask. She knew Lisa had the files, the documents, the evidence, everything that would expose the corruption Victor had built and the crimes the board had enabled. Lisa was on her side, and with her help, Nia had everything she needed to take down the entire operation. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Lisa Morrison, Nia said, her voice cutting through the tension. She's here with all the legal proof you'll need to understand what's really been going on at Titan. Harold's eyes widened slightly, and the rest of the room grew even more tense. This was the moment. Lisa placed a sleek folder on the table in front of her, the crisp sound of paper filling the otherwise silent room. The eyes of the board members, once filled with arrogance, now flickered with a mix of fear and uncertainty. Nia could see them calculating, assessing the situation. They had underestimated her, assumed she would crumble like so many others. But today, they were the ones on the defensive. Lisa opened the folder, slowly flipping through the pages with a calm precision that matched Nia's own. This, she said, lifting a document and sliding it across the table, is a record of financial discrepancies, falsified reports, and illicit transactions linked directly to Titan's top executives. It's all there. Every illegal deal, every manipulation that has kept you in power for years. And it's all coming to light now. The board members shifted in their seats, some looking away, others staring at the documents as though they might burn them with their gaze. Nia could see the realization dawning on their faces. They were trapped. There was nowhere left to hide. The walls were closing in, and they had no way out. Harold, who had always prided himself on his unshakable control, suddenly seemed small, his usual bravado replaced with a hint of panic. You don't have the authority to do this, he spat, his voice shaky. The shareholders won't believe you. They'll back us, not you. Nia met his gaze, her eyes steely with resolve. It's not just about the shareholders anymore, Harold. It's about accountability, about facing the consequences of your actions. You've been hiding behind Victor for too long, but the truth has a way of catching up with everyone. Lisa pushed another set of papers toward the table, each one detailing illegal payments, backdoor deals, and evidence of Victor's influence over the entire organization. The evidence was overwhelming, damning even, and there was more where that came from. The more Nia had learned about the inner workings of Titan, the clearer it became that Victor's entire empire was built on a foundation of lies. I've already contacted the proper authorities, Lisa continued, her tone matter-of-fact. And this isn't just an internal issue anymore. This goes beyond corporate fraud. It's criminal. If you don't make the right decision, you'll be implicated in every illegal action Victor's company has ever taken. The room fell into an almost suffocating silence. The once confident faces of the board members now wore expressions of fear, anger, and desperation. Nia knew that fear would drive them to make reckless decisions, but it was too late for that now. They couldn't afford to run anymore. You have two choices, Nia said, her voice calm but unwavering. You can either accept the truth, step down, and face the consequences, or I'll make sure the public hears every word of this. The media will be all over it, and you'll never work in this town again. Harold looked like he was about to protest again, but Nia cut him off. This isn't a negotiation. You had your chance to make things right, and you chose loyalty to Victor over integrity. Now it's time to pay the price. She turned to Lisa, giving her a subtle nod. Lisa pulled out a final document from the folder and slid it across the table. The room was silent as Harold reluctantly took it, his hands trembling slightly as he glanced at the contents. "What's this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the proof," Nia replied. "The proof that Victor orchestrated the entire thing, the financial fraud, the illegal activities, everything. Once this gets into the right hands, there's no coming back from it. Titan Industries will be dismantled, and you'll be left to pick up the pieces." For the first time, Harold looked defeated. His shoulders slumped as he stared at the evidence before him, realizing that the empire he had helped build was crumbling around him. The others at the table exchanged uneasy glances, some already starting to stand, their resolve faltering. "This is it," Nia said, her voice firm. "It's over." One by one, the board members slowly stood, their faces a mixture of resignation and fear. Nia had won. The company was hers again, and Victor Grayson's reign of terror was over. But she knew this wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning of what was to come. The road ahead would be long and complicated, but with the board in disarray and the truth now exposed, Nia was ready for whatever came next. As the board members filed out of the room, Nia stood tall, her back straight, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. She had taken back control, but now it was time to rebuild, to take Titan Industries from the ashes of corruption and mold it into something better, something real. The battle had been hard fought, but Nia knew that the true work was just beginning. Victor Grayson had been defeated, but there was still so much more to do. Nia walked out of the boardroom with a quiet sense of triumph, though she kept her emotions tightly in check. She had done it. She had exposed Victor's empire for what it was, rotten to the core, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight that had been on her shoulders seemed a little lighter. But she knew better than to celebrate. The battle was far from over, and the road ahead was still fraught with obstacles. She had torn down one giant, but there were many more in her way. She moved through the glass-walled halls of Titan Industries with purpose, her mind already calculating her next move. Her first victory had been monumental, but now she had to rebuild. Titan couldn't remain the hollow shell it had been under Victor's control, and that meant a total overhaul. The board had agreed to step down, but the true work was about to begin. The company needed leadership, real leadership, and she was going to give it to them. Nia's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out to find a message from Tom. "We're in. The media's already picking up on the story. It's bigger than we expected. You need to be prepared for what's coming next." She sighed, her fingers tightening around the phone. She had expected the media frenzy, but hearing it from Tom made it all feel so much more real. Victor had always been a master of manipulating the public narrative. Now it was her turn to take control of that narrative. The press would spin their own version of events, but Nia wasn't about to let them do it unchecked. She typed out a quick response. "I'm ready. I've got a plan. Meet me at the office in an hour. We're going to take the narrative back." The reply came instantly. "Got it. I'll be there." As Nia reached the elevator, her mind raced. The board's resignation was only the beginning, but the public hadn't fully realized the extent of Victor's corruption yet. They would soon. She would make sure of it. The next step was critical. She had to ensure that the truth about Victor and the board's involvement spread far and wide. No more hiding, no more silence. She would take back Titan, piece by piece, and she would start with the media. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Nia stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, she looked at her reflection in the polished steel, seeing the same woman she had always been, a survivor. But there was something new in her gaze now, something sharper. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for control. Her reflection stared back at her, and for the first time in a long while, Nia felt like she was truly in charge of her destiny. But that power was fragile, and she knew she couldn't afford to lose it. She had to keep pushing forward, keep moving. There was no room for hesitation. The elevator dinged as it reached the top floor, and Nia stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the polished marble. The city sprawled beneath her, 1,000 stories waiting to unfold. But this was her story now. Victor Grayson had tried to erase her. He had failed, and now it was time for her to show the world who she really was. Nia walked into her office with a renewed sense of purpose. The sleek glass walls and modern decor that had once felt impersonal now seemed like a battleground waiting to be conquered. As she crossed the room, she could almost hear the echo of her footsteps against the cool, polished floors. This was her space now. This was the headquarters of the new Titan Industries, and she wasn't about to let anyone forget that. Tom was already there, pacing in front of the large window that offered a view of the city. He looked up when he saw her, his expression one of both concern and anticipation. "The media's starting to report on the board's resignation," he said, his voice tight. "But we need to control the message before they get ahead of us." Nia nodded, her face hardening. "That's exactly what I plan to do," she said. She had already anticipated this. The media was a double-edged sword. While the truth was on her side, the narrative still needed to be shaped, directed, and presented in a way that would expose the corruption without losing momentum. "I've been thinking about the statement we should release," Tom continued, moving over to the desk where Nia had dropped her bag. "We could go the route of transparency, lay out the facts as they are, no spin. But there's a risk that people will see this as a corporate shakeup, just another power struggle. We need to make them see that this is about justice." Nia stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. "Justice, exactly. This isn't just a corporate battle. It's about restoring integrity. Titan wasn't just corrupt, it was built on lies. I need the public to understand that. I need them to see how far Victor was willing to go to maintain his grip on power." Tom paused, clearly contemplating the gravity of her words. "So we're not just talking about making Titan a better company? We're going after Victor directly, exposing everything." "Exactly," Nia said, her voice low and filled with determination. "Victor's empire was built on manipulation, on bending people to his will. But the truth is, he's the one who's been playing with fire. He underestimated me, and now it's time for him to pay the price." Tom leaned against the desk, nodding slowly. "So, what's the plan?" "We've got the legal angle, the documents, and the public backing. But Victor still has resources. He's got people who will do whatever it takes to protect him." "That's why we need to be strategic," Nia replied, her mind already turning through the possible moves. "We need to release the information in phases. Hit the media with the truth, then back it up with hard evidence. I'll make sure the public knows exactly who Victor is and what he's done. Once that's out there, it'll be impossible for him to deny." "And the board?" Tom asked. "Do you think they'll stick with you once the real dirt starts coming out?" "They'll have no choice," Nia said, her voice laced with confidence. "The board is already splintering. Once the media catches wind of the full extent of the corruption, they'll fall in line. No one's going to want to be associated with a man like Victor. The only thing that matters now is getting the message right." As Nia walked toward the desk, her mind continued to work through the next steps. The media, the press releases, the leaks. She had 1,000 things to consider, but she was ready. She had always been ready for this. The world had underestimated her at every turn, but she wasn't about to let that happen again. "Get the first draft of the statement ready," she said, turning back to Tom. "I want to be out in front of this before they spin it. We're going to take the narrative back, and we're going to make sure Victor Grayson never has the power to hurt anyone again." Tom nodded, his eyes steady with trust and understanding. He had seen Nia navigate some of the most complex corporate battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just about business. It was about her future, her legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. As she stood there, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders, Nia knew this was only the beginning, but the path ahead was clear. She would fight and she would win, no matter what. Nia sat at her desk, staring at the screen in front of her. The statement was ready. The press release was drafted. The evidence had been compiled, and now it was time. She had played her cards carefully up until this point, but now the entire world was about to see what Victor Grayson had been hiding. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, but she didn't flinch. There was no room for hesitation. Not now. Tom had already alerted the media, and the first news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Titan Industries was going through its biggest shakeup in history, and the word was already starting to spread that Nia Jackson was taking over. But that wasn't the full picture. The press release wasn't just a corporate statement. It was the beginning of Victor Grayson's unraveling. Nia had everything planned, every word, every detail. Now she just needed to execute. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk as her mind ran through the next steps. The media would soon demand a response from Victor. She could already hear his lawyers scrambling to deny the allegations, to downplay his role in the company's corruption. But Nia wasn't going to let him control the narrative this time. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, seeing a message from Lisa. "We've confirmed the leak. Grayson's camp is already working to discredit the evidence. Expect more pushback." Nia's jaw tightened. Of course they were. Victor wouldn't go down quietly. He had always been ruthless, always one step ahead. But that's what she had been preparing for. Victor's last-ditch effort to manipulate the story, to spin his version of events before the truth fully hit the public. She quickly typed a reply. "Let them try. We're not backing down. Make sure the next round of evidence goes live at the right time. This ends today." Tom, who had been on the other end of the room, looked up from his phone and caught Nia's eye. He gave her a slight nod. The team was ready. Everyone knew what had to be done. "We've got one shot at this," Nia said, her voice steady as she stood up from her chair and moved toward the window. The city stretched before her, its skyline gleaming in the early afternoon light. "Once we release this, there's no going back. We'll have to keep our focus. No distractions." Tom stood and walked over, standing beside her, both of them looking out over the city that was about to change. "Are you sure about this? Once the media gets a hold of the full story, it's going to explode. They'll want answers." Nia nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm not worried about the fallout. What I'm worried about is how far Victor will go to protect himself. We've exposed him, but he'll do everything in his power to bury us. He won't stop until he's destroyed everything I've built." Tom's eyes darkened at the thought, but he didn't speak. They both knew the truth. Victor Grayson was a dangerous man, and he wouldn't hesitate to strike back. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," Nia said, her voice cool and confident. "The truth is on our side, and once it's out there, no one will believe his lies." Just as she said those words, her phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. It was from Darnell, her lawyer. "Nia," Darnell's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and urgent. "Victor just filed an injunction to block the press release. They're moving fast. We're already behind." Nia's stomach sank for a moment, but she didn't let it show. "Let them file whatever they want. We've got enough to go forward. The world will see Victor for what he is." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I won't let him control the narrative any longer. This stops now." She looked over at Tom, who gave her a small, approving nod. They were in this together. It was time to finish what they had started. The battle was far from over, but Nia was ready. She had the truth, and that was all she needed. "Get the media prepared," she said to Darnell. "The clock is ticking." As Nia ended the call with Darnell, the weight of the moment settled back onto her shoulders. She could feel the pressure mounting, the battle intensifying. This was it, the final push. The media, the evidence, the public reaction, everything was set in motion. Now it was just a matter of time before the storm hit. Tom looked at her, sensing the shift in her mood. "What now?" he asked quietly, his voice low but filled with the unspoken understanding that this was their turning point. Nia gave him a quick glance, her eyes hard but filled with determination. "Now we wait, and we control what happens next. The injunction Victor filed? It won't hold. We've got too much backing us. But we need to be ready. He's going to fight dirty, and he'll try to stir up a counter-narrative. We can't let that happen." They were no longer just fighting for control of Titan Industries. They were fighting for their freedom. Victor had created an empire of fear and lies, but Nia was ready to tear it down. She had come too far, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to back down now. As they waited, Nia couldn't help but replay the events that had led her here. The moments when she had felt powerless, the doubts she had struggled with. But now, standing at the precipice of her victory, there was no room for fear. She was in control. This was her moment, and nothing would take it from her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Lisa. The first batch of leaks is out. The media is already asking questions. It's spreading fast. Nia's heart raced. She had been prepared for the media frenzy, but seeing it unfold in real time made it feel all the more real. "Let's get ahead of this," she said to Tom, her voice firm. "The truth is out now. We can't let Victor control the spin. We need to be the ones talking to the press." Tom nodded and immediately began setting up the press conference for later that afternoon. Nia knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way to ensure the public saw what she wanted them to see. The moment they gave Victor's side a platform, it would all be over. She couldn't afford to let that happen. The next few hours passed in a blur. The phone calls, the emails, the frantic preparations. Nia didn't have time to breathe. As the conference loomed closer, her nerves steadied. She was ready for this. She had the truth. She had the evidence. And she had a plan that would make sure Victor Grayson would never rise again. By the time she entered the conference room, the press had already gathered, their cameras flashing, reporters murmuring among themselves. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with anticipation. Nia walked to the podium with her head held high, her posture straight, the weight of the moment carrying her forward. She could already see the reporters positioning themselves, some eager to ask the first question, others unsure of how to approach the woman who was about to change everything. But Nia knew exactly what to do. She had been in situations like this before, facing down challenges, speaking her truth when no one else would. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone turn her story into something else. Taking a deep breath, she stepped up to the microphone, her eyes scanning the room. The press conference was about to begin, and Nia Jackson wasn't just going to take control of Titan Industries. She was about to take control of her destiny. The room was filled with the low hum of murmurs as the press conference began. The cameras clicked and flashed, and the sharp buzz of microphones being adjusted filled the space. Nia stood at the podium, her back straight, her posture unwavering as she prepared to face the media storm that was about to hit. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, steadying her nerves. This was her moment to show the world who she really was, to make sure her story was heard before Victor Grayson or his loyalists could get a chance to spin it. She could feel the weight of the room's collective gaze on her, the pressure thick in the air. But Nia didn't flinch. This wasn't the first time she had been under a spotlight, and it wouldn't be the last. She had fought for this, and now she was going to take control. The lead reporter, a woman with sharp glasses and a stack of notes, raised her hand first. "Ms. Jackson," she began, her voice carrying through the microphone, "you've just taken over Titan Industries after exposing a massive corruption scheme led by the former CEO, Victor Grayson. But many are asking, what now? What's next for Titan? Can you truly change a company built on such a foundation of deceit?" Nia took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but she kept her focus steady. "Yes, I can," she said firmly. Her voice echoed through the room, strong and unwavering. "Titan Industries has been tainted by lies, manipulation, and greed for far too long. But I am here to make sure it rises again. This company will not only survive, it will thrive. We are going to rebuild, and we will do it the right way, with transparency, integrity, and a commitment to real change." The reporter scribbled furiously in her notebook, her pen never stopping. Nia could see the intrigue in her eyes. It was working. The media was hungry for a narrative, and Nia was more than ready to provide it. Another reporter jumped in. "Victor Grayson still has a significant amount of support within the company and the business world. What steps are you taking to ensure that his influence doesn't continue to poison Titan from within? And what will you do about the board members who were complicit in his actions?" Nia's eyes narrowed slightly. This was where the real battle lay, rooting out the remnants of Victor's influence and making sure no one would stand in his shadow. I've already made it clear that the old guard has no place here anymore. The board has been dissolved. New leadership will take charge. I won't tolerate any remnants of the corruption that plagued this company. As for Victor's supporters, I'm confident they will be removed, either by their own choice or by mine. The room fell into a brief silence as the reporters processed her words. Nia could almost hear the wheels turning in their minds. This wasn't just a typical corporate press conference. She was offering them something bigger, something they could sink their teeth into. A young male reporter spoke up next, his voice sharp. And what about Victor Grayson himself? There are rumors that he's trying to fight back. What's your plan for dealing with him? Nia's expression hardened, her gaze unyielding. Victor Grayson has made his choices, and now he will face the consequences. He has a lot to answer for, both legally and morally. But make no mistake, I will not let him destroy everything I've worked for. He's already lost. This is over. The confidence in her voice was unmistakable. The reporters exchanged glances, sensing that Nia wasn't just speaking from a place of anger, she was speaking from power. Her words were deliberate, carefully chosen, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. This was no longer just about taking down Victor. This was about reclaiming Titan and reshaping the future. As the first round of questions died down, Nia felt a surge of determination. She had taken control of the conversation, and the media was beginning to see her as the face of the new Titan Industries. The room buzzed with anticipation, but Nia wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. She had to keep pushing forward, keeping the momentum going. There were still many battles to fight, many pieces to move, but for the first time in a long while, Nia felt like the world was listening to her, and this time, she wasn't going to let them forget. The questions came faster now, each reporter eager to get their piece of the story, trying to peel back the layers of the story Nia was telling. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The initial skepticism was fading, replaced by intrigue, and maybe even a hint of respect. The narrative was no longer about Victor's downfall alone. It was about Nia's rise, her vision for Titan, and how she was going to reshape an empire from the ashes of corruption. A reporter raised their hand asking, Ms. Jackson, many people are concerned about the company's future workforce. With so many executives and senior members having been tied to Victor, how will you ensure that the culture of Titan changes? How do you address concerns about loyalty within the ranks? Nia's lips curled into a subtle smile. This was a question she had expected. The foundation of any company wasn't just its assets or its market share, it was its people. And Nia knew that rebuilding Titan meant rebuilding trust among those who worked there. I'm going to be transparent with all of Titan's employees, she said, her voice steady. I know there's fear and there's uncertainty. That's natural after such a drastic change. But my message is simple. If you want to be a part of Titan's future, you have to be ready to embrace change. Those who are committed to integrity, who are ready to build something real, will have a place here. But I won't stand for anyone trying to hold on to the old ways. The loyalty I'm looking for is loyalty to the values that will guide this company forward. Honesty, fairness, and respect. Nia paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. She knew the internal battles would be just as hard as the external ones, but she was ready for them. She could already picture the faces of the employees she needed to win over, the nervous smiles, the cautious optimism. Titan's culture wasn't something she could just change with a few words, but it was a start. She had to set the tone. The rest would follow. The questions continued, but Nia's focus sharpened. She wasn't just giving answers. She was laying the groundwork for Titan's future. Each word she spoke was a piece of the foundation she was building, and she was determined to make sure that the world knew exactly what she stood for. Then a voice from the back of the room interrupted her flow. It was one of the reporters who had been quieter until now. Ms. Jackson, you've talked a lot about accountability and change. But what about the public backlash? There's no doubt that Victor's supporters will fight this. What happens when they come after you directly? How will you protect yourself from their attacks? Nia's expression didn't waver. She had anticipated this question too. The battle with Victor wasn't just going to be about Titan. It was personal now. And she knew that when people like Victor Grayson fought back, they didn't play fair. I've already been fighting for my future, she said, her tone low but resolute. Victor isn't the first person to try to tear me down. I've faced challenges, I've faced betrayal, and I've always come out stronger on the other side. This time will be no different. I will defend Titan's future, and I will protect myself. But let's be clear, this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who believes in what we're doing here. Together, we're going to make sure the truth wins. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Nia could feel the weight of the press watching her, evaluating her every move. But she didn't back down. She couldn't. Not now, not ever. The final reporter of the day stood up, and Nia knew this was the last question. You mentioned earlier that you wouldn't let Victor destroy what you've worked for. But what happens if he continues to fight back? If he tries to sabotage you and Titan's future? What's your plan then? Nia's eyes locked onto the reporters, and her voice was steady, almost cold. Victor will learn that you can only push someone so far before they push back harder. I'm done being silent, done being underestimated. If he wants to fight, he'll find out just how strong I really am. But I won't be drawn into his game. This is about Titan, and I won't let anyone, not Victor, not anyone, destroy what we've started here. The finality in her voice seemed to settle over the room like a heavy blanket. The reporters exchanged glances, their notebooks filled with more questions than answers. But they knew the story had already shifted. Nia Jackson wasn't just the new CEO of Titan Industries. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the conference wrapped up, Nia stepped away from the podium, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She had made her stand, and now there was no turning back. The world was watching, and she was ready for whatever came next. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Nia. The media frenzy surrounding her takeover of Titan Industries was intense, but it was the internal operations that kept her awake at night. While the press coverage had painted a picture of a woman who was taking charge, transforming Titan into a beacon of integrity, Nia knew that the real battle was within the company walls. There were whispers among the employees, some of them loyal to Victor, others uncertain about the changes that were sweeping through their corporate home. Her first order of business was to address Titan's workforce directly. She couldn't afford to leave the company's fate in the hands of uncertain employees or power-hungry individuals still loyal to Victor. She knew she needed to rebuild from the inside out, and that started with trust. She sent out an invitation to all Titan employees for a company-wide town hall meeting. The goal was simple: to speak to them face to face, to let them know that they were part of the new Titan, not the old one. The words of reassurance were critical, but she also knew that actions would speak louder than anything she could say. The day of the town hall, the energy in the room was palpable. It wasn't just the employees who had questions. Nia could sense their distrust, their doubts about the future. As she stepped onto the stage, she noticed the mixed expressions in the crowd. Some were hopeful, while others were skeptical. It was clear that Victor's influence hadn't vanished overnight. Nia's task was to convince them that she wasn't just another CEO coming in to clean house. She was someone who understood what it meant to build something that could last, something rooted in integrity and respect. As she began her speech, her voice clear and commanding, Nia spoke about the direction she planned to take Titan. She talked about accountability, transparency, and how every decision made moving forward would reflect those values. She reminded them that the strength of Titan had always come from its people, not its power or prestige. She didn't want Titan to be a company built on fear, and certainly not a company that thrived on lies. But she also knew there was a limit to how far words alone could go. Nia's eyes scanned the room, picking out the faces of those who were already on her side and those who were still holding on to the remnants of Victor's empire. She had to make a choice. Let the skeptics hold her back or push forward and show them the kind of leader she truly was. She ended her speech with a simple yet powerful statement. Titan's future will be built on the foundation of truth. If you're ready to build that future with me, then we'll make history together. The room fell silent for a moment, and then a few employees began to clap. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As Nia stepped down from the stage, the room filled with a buzz of conversation. Some employees were still unsure, exchanging glances and murmuring to one another, while others seemed genuinely moved by her words. She could feel the weight of their stares as she made her way toward the exit. She had made her point, but she knew it wasn't enough to win everyone over in one go. This wasn't a game of speeches. It was about trust, consistency, and the actions that followed her promises. In the coming days, Nia would work to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by Victor's reign. She spent time in different departments, meeting with employees one-on-one and in small groups. She asked them about their concerns, listened to their frustrations, and most importantly, showed them that she wasn't like the leaders they had grown accustomed to under Victor's rule. She made it clear that she wasn't going to tolerate anyone who still adhered to the old ways, those who were comfortable with dishonesty, manipulation, and fear. It wasn't easy. Some employees resisted her changes, holding tightly to the way things had always been. But Nia had learned long ago that real leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about being respected. She wasn't afraid to make tough decisions, to hold people accountable for their actions, even if it meant letting go of some of Titan's long-standing executives. One afternoon, as Nia was walking through the executive wing, she was approached by Marjorie Clean, one of the senior VPs who had been with Titan for decades. Marjorie had been a key ally to Victor, and Nia wasn't sure where she stood now. The older woman stood in front of her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "You've made your move, Nia," Marjorie said, her voice steady but sharp. "But know this, you won't win everyone over this easily. There are still people in this company who will fight you, and not all of them are as transparent as you claim to be. You'll have to do more than just talk." Nia met Marjorie's gaze, unfazed. She had expected some resistance from the veteran executives. They had spent years thriving in an environment where loyalty was bought and manipulation was common currency. "I'm not here to make friends," Nia replied, her tone calm but firm. "I'm here to fix what's broken, and if that means taking on some tough battles, then so be it." Marjorie nodded slowly as if weighing Nia's words. Then she sighed and uncrossed her arms. "I suppose you're right," she said, "but don't underestimate the people who built this company. They won't go down without a fight, and neither will I." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Nia responded. "But just remember, this isn't about the past anymore. It's about what we do from here on out. And if you want to be a part of Titan's future, I'll welcome you. But only if you're willing to let go of the old ways and embrace what's right." Marjorie seemed to hesitate for a moment, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "We'll see," she said softly before walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Nia watched her leave, knowing that the real work was just beginning. There were still many who would test her resolve, challenge her decisions, and try to hold on to the old guard. But Nia wasn't backing down. She had a vision for Titan, one that didn't include the corruption, lies, or fear that had ruled the company for so long. As she continued her walk through the hallways, Nia felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't just fighting for the future of Titan, she was fighting for her own legacy, a legacy built on truth, integrity, and a commitment to making things right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone stop her. Nia sat in the quiet of her office, the weight of the last few weeks pressing down on her. Titan Industries had been in chaos, a whirlwind of media storms, internal resistance, and long-standing issues. But now the dust was beginning to settle. The first phase of her takeover was complete. The board was dissolved, the corrupt executives were either gone or on their way out, and Titan was finally moving in the direction it needed to. Still, there was no denying the tension that lingered in the air. It was the calm before the storm. The battle with Victor Grayson was far from over. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Tom. "Victor's team has begun making moves again. They're not giving up." She let out a slow breath, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. She had known Victor wouldn't back down easily. His empire, built on lies and manipulation, wasn't something he'd let crumble without a fight. But Nia had no intention of letting him reclaim even a sliver of control. Titan's future was in her hands now, and she would protect it with everything she had. The door to her office creaked open, and Marjorie Clean stepped inside. She was a senior VP who had been with Titan for decades, long before Victor had ever made his mark. While her loyalty had been questionable in the past, Nia had given her a chance, And now it seemed that Marjorie had a few things to say. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Marjorie said, her voice softer than usual. There was a hint of something new in her eyes, something that Nia hadn't seen before. Respect. Or maybe it was simply acknowledgement of the inevitable. "No interruption at all," Nia replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. She wasn't surprised by Marjorie's visit. The tension between them had always been thick, and Nia knew this was a pivotal moment for the veteran VP. Marjorie had been one of Victor's most trusted allies, but her position was now under scrutiny, and Nia suspected she had doubts about Victor's leadership. Marjorie sat down across from Nia, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I know I haven't been easy on you," she began, her gaze steady, "but I think it's time I say something. You've done what no one else had the courage to do. You've faced down Victor Grayson, and you've won." Nia leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "I didn't win yet. There's still a lot of work to do." Marjorie nodded, her lips curling into a small, almost reluctant smile. "You're right. There's always more work to be done in a company this size. But you've earned your seat at the table, Nia. You've proven that you have what it takes to lead, and that's not something Victor ever understood." Nia didn't let herself smile, but she felt the corners of her mouth twitch. "What's your point, Marjorie?" "I'm willing to help you," Marjorie said, her voice resolute. "Victor's supporters are still trying to hold on, and you're going to need all the allies you can get. I'm not here to play games anymore. I'm here to help you take down the last remnants of his influence, once and for all." The words hung in the air for a moment. Nia studied Marjorie's face, trying to gauge her sincerity. She had been a staunch supporter of Victor, but in the wake of his fall, it seemed as though the tides were turning. Perhaps, like many others, Marjorie had come to see the truth of Nia's leadership. "I'm listening," Nia said quietly, her voice firm but open. Marjorie hesitated for a moment before leaning forward, lowering her voice. "Victor's not just going to vanish. He's already making moves behind the scenes, pulling strings with the media, with some of the smaller board members who are still loyal to him. He's trying to stage a comeback, but I think there's a way we can stop him once and for all." Nia's attention sharpened. She knew that her fight with Victor wasn't over. She had expected retaliation, but hearing it confirmed was a reminder of how ruthless he could be. "What's the plan?" she asked, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Marjorie looked at her with newfound respect, as though Nia's willingness to listen had shifted their relationship entirely. "We need to get ahead of him. Use the resources Victor left behind against him. I know where some of his hidden assets are, and there are people I trust who can help us with the logistics." Nia's eyes narrowed. This was what she needed: intel, strategy, and allies. "All right, we'll start working on that," she said, already thinking ahead. "But we need to do it quickly. The longer we wait, the more time Victor has to regroup." Marjorie nodded, rising to her feet. "We'll move fast. I'll get to work." As she turned to leave, Nia remained seated, her gaze fixed on the city skyline outside her window. The battle with Victor was far from over, but now it seemed like she had the resources she needed to finish it. There was no more room for hesitation. She had to keep pushing forward because Titan's future and her own depended on it. The next few days were a blur of strategic planning and late-night meetings. Nia couldn't afford to slow down now. Every decision she made, every move she took, had to be calculated. With Marjorie's help, they had begun to uncover more of Victor's hidden dealings. Offshore accounts, backdoor contracts, and loyalists in key positions, still trying to sabotage the company's future. Nia was determined to cut through the tangled mess he had left behind. She spent countless hours with her inner circle, developing strategies and coordinating efforts to remove the last vestiges of Victor's influence. It wasn't just about taking down the people who were loyal to him. It was about ensuring Titan would be rebuilt in a way that couldn't be destroyed again. She had to make sure that this time, Titan's foundation would be built on trust, integrity, and a commitment to something real. Victor, however, wasn't going down without a fight. Nia had expected retaliation, but what came next was far more brutal than she could have imagined. Her office phone rang late one evening, Tom's name flashing on the screen. She picked it up immediately. "Victor just made his move," Tom said, his voice tense. "He's leaking false information about you to the press, turning the media against you. He's already got his narrative out there, painting you as the villain, claiming that you're trying to take down everything Titan was built on. Nia's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained her composure. She had known this was coming. Victor would use any means necessary to get back into control. "What's the damage?" she asked, her voice calm despite the storm she could feel brewing. "Public opinion is starting to shift," Tom replied, his frustration palpable. "There are articles painting you as a power-hungry CEO, and some of your most vocal supporters are being attacked. They're even dragging up your personal history to discredit you. They're making it personal." Nia stood up, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. She had been expecting Victor to pull something like this. The media could be a powerful weapon, but it could also be turned against those who wielded it poorly. "We need to control this," Nia said, her voice sharp and decisive. "We can't let this narrative stick. Get the team together. We need to expose the truth, and we need to do it now." She knew that Victor's tactics were dangerous, but she wasn't going to let him manipulate the story. Not now, not ever. The time had come for her to take the narrative back. She couldn't allow the lies to fester. The truth had to rise above the noise. "I'll get on it immediately," Tom said, his voice laced with resolve. "We'll fight back harder." As Nia hung up the phone, she took a deep breath. This was her moment to prove that she wouldn't be swayed by Victor's underhanded tactics. She had worked too hard to let him destroy everything she had built. Titan's future depended on it, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. She walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Titan was hers to rebuild, and no one, not Victor, not anyone, was going to take that away from her. The fight had just taken a new turn, but Nia was ready. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the future of Titan, and that was a battle she couldn't afford to lose.